Gangster movies emerged as a major part of the Hollywood genre in the early 1930s. But I feel like right now, gangster and mob movies are pretty much underrated. It's one of my favorites, but it ain't the favorite. You know, it's like I said, it's in my top five, but it's not my number one. But this is probably the GOAT of all gangster movies. The Godfather, 1972. Tony Montana is the iconic, ruthless Cuban immigrant played by Al Pacino, who rises from a refugee to a powerful drug lord in Miami, becoming a cultural symbol of the dark side of the American dream. Welcome to episode 16. Yes, sweet 16 of Ultimate Opinion, which boy Daniel, aka D Money. On this podcast, I intend to be subjective and transparent when giving my opinion on these topics. So, yes, we are sweet 16. This is my 16th episode. Like I said, I'm really happy, fortunate to be able to do this every month with you guys. You know, me share some knowledge, my expertise when it comes to pop culture and all that good stuff. But today we got a good episode. It's a magnificent episode. Well, hell, all my episodes are good, but this one you guys are gonna really like. But before we dive into today's episode, I got some shout outs to give to a few individuals. So a couple weeks back, it was 2026 iHeart Podcast Awards. And I just want to shout out some of the winners. Well, actually just a couple winners. Podcast of the Year, Gilly Squad, hosted by reality TV stars and best friends Hannah Berner and Paige DeSorbo, I think that's how you say it. And Best Pop Culture, Call Her Daddy, hosted by the beautiful Alex Cooper, that covers adult themed topics through interviews with celebrity guests. So once again, you know, I always got to give shout out to the pop culture category, since that's what I do. And like I said, having a podcast depends on how you do it and what you do. It could be easy, but you have to put in the time and the work. You have to make sure your topics are on point, and just make sure, like I said, if you do want to start a podcast, and I tell anybody, if you got a passion to talk, or if you got some knowledge that you want to share, go ahead and start a podcast and just talk. Just talk about what you are passionate for. So, like I said, congratulations to the 2026, all of the 2026 iHeart Podcast nominees and winners. Like I said, having a podcast is unique. Special people can do it. Anybody can do it. Like I said, all you have to do is just talk about something that you're passionate about. So let's get into today's episode. So today's episode, I will be giving my opinion on my top 5 favorite gangster movies. Yes, gangster / mob movies. If you guys can recall, last season for Christmas, I did my top 5 Christmas movies. And I decided, you know what? I love movies. Of course I do. I said comedies, horrors, adventure, well, not really adventures, action, and I love my movies. And I feel like right now I don't even remember the recent like gangster good mob movie that done actually came out. Like I said, you know, now everything's streaming, and the way the theaters are now, it's actually hard to see good trailers. Of course, you can still go to YouTube and all that, but I feel like right now, gangster and mob movies are pretty much underrated. You know, now a gangster movie is just a bunch of gangs shooting up each other and all that. We're like, I'm talking about the classic gangster mafia movie. So like I said, I'm gonna get my top 5, starting with, 5 being the least, and then work my way up to my number 1 favorite gangster movie. I'm gonna give the plot of the movie, the actors and the characters, Then I'm gonna also towards the end, uh, of course, talk about America's most notorious gangster and the effect it has on pop culture. And then also, I will also end this episode with, of course, when it comes to Hollywood, I think this is gonna be an easy one. I'm going to give my all-time best actor in Hollywood when it comes to gangster and mafia movies. There's plenty, but I think this one guy, you can't think of a gangster or mafia movie without this actor. So let's dive in, peeps. History of gangster movies. Gangster movies emerged as a major part of the Hollywood genre in the early 1930s, fueled by the Great Depression era and the notoriety of the Prohibition era and criminals. Legendary movies like Little Caesar 1931, The Public Enemy 1931, and Scarface 1932 established archetypes of rising gangsters, often reflecting societal fears and urban decay. So, in the 1930s, it shows that's when the gangster and the mob movies became really hot because during that time, it was a lot of gangsters and organized crime going on. My number five favorite gangster mafia movie of all time is, which to me is kind of underrated because I don't think a lot of people don't see this. Once Upon a Time in America, 1984, a crime epic following the 40-year rise and fall of Jewish gangsters in New York, mainly focusing on the complicated friendship of David Noodles Erison and Max Berkowitz. Spanning from the 1920s to 1968, it explores themes of greed, friendship, betrayal. Inter- so it's told through an aging Noodles memories of his life in crime. So now I gave basically the plot of Once Upon a Time in America, and now I'm gonna give some specific characters and the actors that play these characters. David Noodles Erison. The central figure, he is defined by a conflict between his brutal criminal life, portrayed by the great Robert De Niro. Noodles is romantic and sensitive towards his childhood love, Deborah. He is often haunted by his actions and the death of his friends. Maximilian Berkowitz, I think is how you say it. Ambitious, charming, and extremely manipulative, portrayed by James Wood. He is the driving force behind the gang's escalation into more dangerous high stakes crimes, all for desire for power and wealth. His ruthless behavior gets his friends killed. So, like I was stating, Once Upon a Time in America is really an underrated gangster movie. Uh, but the reason why I like it so much is because it's a Jewish mob. So, back in the 1930s, most mob movies and mafia people were either of Italian descent or Irish. And of course, in the black neighborhoods, you had like the black gangs that was, that they didn't really call themselves a mob, but they were gangs. But the fact that these guys were Jewish and they didn't work for a specific family, which made their gang kind of more unique. Now they did take on a bunch of partners, of course, that they screwed and killed and all that. But they was out here robbing banks and, of course, bootlegging because, during the, before Prohibition, alcohol was illegal. So they was bootlegging, they was doing all that. But like I said, that's one of those, like I said, gangster movies to me that's underrated and it don't really get a lot of love. But like I said, it's one of my favorites. I grew up watching it. And like I said, if you want to see a good mob movie, which they're all good, like I said, definitely check out Once Upon a Time in America. Now, this other one is probably the GOATs of all gangster mob movies, but it's one of my favorites, but it ain't the favorite. You know, it's like I said, it's in my top five, but it's not my number one. But this is probably the GOAT of all gangster movies. The Godfather, 1972. This film follows the Corleone family from 1945 to 1955, where aging patriarch Vito Corleone transferred powers to his reluctant youngest son, Michael. After Vito refuses to enter the drug trade, a mob war erupts, leading to an assassination attempt on him. Michael, a World War II hero who wanted nothing to do with the family business, avenges his father by killing Salizo, I think it's how you say it, and a corrupt cop captain fleeing to Sicily. So, like I was saying, you know, everybody know that the Godfather is, like I said, the Godfather and the GOAT of all gangster movies. Vito Corleone. Vito Corleone is the patriarch of the Corleone family. He is portrayed by Marlon Brando, and Robert De Niro on Godfather 2 has younger Vito. Known as the Godfather, he is a powerful and respected mafia boss. Even though he built his empire through crime, he also is characterized by his loyalty, family values, and a strict moral code. His story follows his rise from a Sicilian immigrant to a feared and respected Don, Michael Corleone. Michael Corleone, who transforms from a war hero into a ruthless mafia boss, portrayed by Al Pacino, who succeeds his father, Vito, as the head of the crime family. Initially, he wanted no part in the family business, aiming for a more legit life. Unfortunately, after an assassination attempt on Vito, he is drawn into and eventually planning the murders of his rival Dons, eventually taking over as a new godfather. Tim Hagen. Tim Hagen, serving as a Corleone family's lawyer and counselor. Portrayed by Robert Duvall, rest in peace, Tom is the adopted son of Vito Corleone. He is highly intelligent and a loyal advisor. A college educated lawyer, he uses his intellect and legal knowledge to serve the Corleone family. Sonny Corleone. Sonny is a high headed, impulsive son of Vito Corleone, portrayed by the legendary late James Caan. Sonny is known for his violent temper as the family's high-headed underboss, who is ambushed and killed due to his rashness. That's The Godfather. And one of the reasons why I do like this movie so much, so growing up, my great grandmother and my grandmother loved Godfather. Like that was their movie. And every holiday, we will watch the Godfather. You know, The Godfather 1, 2, and I want to say maybe 3, but I know for sure we watched the first two Godfathers. And what I liked about it, yes, they're a criminal family and all that, but they were still a close knit family. And like I said, what I liked about it, you know, granted, you know, of course, if anybody knows the Godfather, you know, Fredo did try to have Michael killed, but before then, they were a close knit family. Vito was really respected. He was real old school when it came to being a Godfather. You know, he didn't want to get involved with the drugs and none of that. He just wanted to do his usual business. And that's why, like I said, Godfather is gonna probably go down as the greatest, like I said, gangster movie of all time. And like I said, you know, most of my family, we know all the lines to it. We know all the characters. You know, that was like I said on holidays, like I said Thanksgiving, Christmases. Like I said we'll just sit around and we'll watch The Godfather because I mean it was family, and that's what family's about. So my third favorite gangster movie of all time is also another GOAT movie, Goodfellas, 1990. A gritty, fast-paced crime drama based on the true life of mob associate Henry Hill. It shows his rise from a teenage errand boy to a wise guy exploring the allure, extreme violence, and eventual downfall of the mafia lifestyle in New York. James Conway. James Jimmy Conway is based on the real life mobster James Jimmy Gent Burke, portrayed by Robert De Niro. He is a high ranking, ruthless associate of the Lachuse, I think Lachise crime family. He is a mentor and partner to Henry Hill and Tommy DeVito. After Jimmy orchestrates the Lufthansa heist, he becomes paranoid and orders the murders of his crew members, viewing them as liabilities and potential snitches. Tommy DeVito. Tommy DeVito is a fictionalized version of the real life mobster Tommy D. Simone. Portrayed by Joe Pesci, Tommy is known for being a violent, high headed, and psychopathic hitman who killed minor insults like Spider and Billy Bats. Tommy enjoyed violence and murder, taking pleasure in killing and showing no remorse. Henry Hill, a real life mob associate whose life story is based off the movie Goodfellas, portrayed by Ray Liotta, a member of the Lachise, guess I'm saying that right, crime family, a trusted associate. Henry was involved in hijackings, loan sharkings, and the 1978 Lufthansa heist. Unfortunately, due to his father being Irish, he was never a made man. He turned into an informant after being arrested for drug trafficking. Afraid that his mob associates would kill him, he was expelled from the witness protection program for his continued criminal activity. So yes, everybody knows Goodfellas. Goodfellas, like I said, is also one of those. It's not underrated because it comes on all the time, and whenever it comes on, I see it. Matter of fact, I got it on DVD. Like I said, Goodfellas is one of those, like I said, classic movies where, Henry Hill, who Ray Liotta portrayed, like, he really didn't have a hard job. Like I said, he was basically, even as an adult, he was still like an errand boy. Like, they didn't make him he didn't do no killing. He didn't really make no deals. Like, all he was basically, like the errand boy. He just drove around. Well, he drove him around, and he would, transport, drugs and weapons back and forth. But his job was not really that dangerous, and that's why it was really surprising the fact that once the Don had told him, I want to say Paulie, okay, when you was in jail, like he said, you did what you had to do to survive. Okay, he told him stop trying to deal the drugs, and then it didn't help that this idiot, he was doing cocaine. So like, how in the hell can you? I never understood how a drug dealer, you're trying to sell the product, but you're taking the product. Make that make sense. And that where his downfall was, because his head was not clear. Like, he was getting coked up damn near every day, but trying to sell it. So that's where his downfall was. But like I said, that's, of course, I said everybody done seen Goodfellas. Like, and like I said, that's also, like I said, the goldish, like, if you want to do like Godfather, Goodfellas, like, 1A, 1B type stuff. But like I said, I do like Goodfellas a little bit more than Godfather, because like I said, it was more, not because of, it showed current day. Well, I mean, I'm not going to really say current because it was damn near over 30 years ago, but it just shows that some of those associates, the errand boys, they might have really been doing side hustles, like, you smoking or taking your own product. That don't make no sense. But that was Goodfellas, and like I recommend anybody to watch that, because that's one hell of a good mob movie. And this one is also one of my favorites. That's why this is my number 2 favorite gangster mafia movie of all time. American Gangster 2007, a biocrime movie depicting the rise and fall of Frank Lucas, a Harlem heroin kingpin who smuggles drugs into the U.S. via Vietnam War service planes during the 1960s and 1970s. The film shows his empire building and his eventual capture by Detective Richie Roberts. Frank Lucas. Frank Lucas was a notorious Harlem drug lord who rose to power in the late 1960s and early 1970s by smuggling heroin from Southeast Asia under the brand Blue Magic, selling the product cheaper. Portrayed by the great Denzel Washington, he depicts Frank Lucas's rise and eventual fall, including his cooperation with law enforcement after his arrest. Lucas's empire started off after the death of his mentor, Bumpy Johnson. Lucas established his own heroin operation, using the coffins of the dead servicemen to smuggle drugs into the U.S. That was messed up, but it was still smart. Richie Roberts. Richie Roberts was a New Jersey detective and prosecutor who led the investigation that ultimately brought down Kingpin Frank Lucas. Portrayed by Russell Crowe, the real Roberts became a defense attorney. Roberts worked as an undercover detective and later as an assistant prosecutor heading the narcotics task force. He was responsible in building the case against Frank Lucas and his heroin trafficking, which led to Frank Lucas getting convicted. Detective Trupo is a corrupt NYPD cop, portrayed by Josh Brolin. His character was based on the real-life detective Bob Lucci. He leads a unit of dirty cops who take bribes from Frank Lucas. To avoid prosecution, he commits suicide. Mama Lucas. Mama Lucas is the moral character in the film portrayed by the legendary Ruby Dee. Is the mother of drug kingpin Frank Lucas. She represents the family's figure who struggles with Frank and the fam's illegal activities. So before American Gangster came out in 2007, I must say my favorite black gangster movie was Hoodlum, starring Lawrence Fishburne as Bumpy Johnson. And that's still kind of, I'm gonna say Hoodlum is probably like my honorary mention. But once I seen American Gangster and my man Denzel Washington did it again, playing ruthless and playing a villain. Which, he really wasn't a villain, but he was a drug kingpin, but it's not like he was like Nino Brown. He wasn't taking over apartments or just killing people in broad daylight. He still demanded respect. And he basically got caught because his brothers were stupid. They were doing just stupid shit. And that's how he basically got caught, because family, and unfortunately, when you happen to have family involved, sometimes the shit can go south real quick. But like I said, American Gangster, like I said, that is a good movie. Like I said, check it out. And like I said, it got a lot of good actors in it. Like I said, it got a lot of good actors in there. Like I said, Cuba Gooding plays a small part. I want to say Idris. Of course, T.I. plays his nephew, and that's why I said when you get a chance, like I said, it got some characters in there that they were minor, but eventually they did blow up, or to become stars or whatever. But yes, I said I would recommend American Gangster to anybody, especially if you are a Denzel Washington guy, which I am. So like of course I'm gonna watch it, because matter of fact, last season when I did for Black History Month, the Denzel Washington and Forrest Whitaker episode, American Gangster was actually one of my favorite movies that he did. So now here go the granddaddy of them all, the grand finale. My all-time favorite gangster movie of all time. Drum roll, please. Scarface, 1983. Tony Montana, a ruthless Cuban refugee who rises from a penniless immigrant to Miami's dominant cocaine kingpin. Driven by greed and paranoia, Tony builds an empire. But his excessive violence, drug addiction, and reckless actions lead to a violent downfall and his death. Tony Montana is the iconic, ruthless Cuban immigrant played by Al Pacino, who rises from a refugee to a powerful drug lord in Miami, becoming a cultural symbol of the dark side of the American dream. Tony Montana is known for his catchphrases, cocaine addiction, and his hot-tempered personality driven by desire for power. Elvira Hancock. Elvira Hancock is a glamorous but emotionally detached wife of drug lord Tony Montana. Played by Michelle Pfeiffer, she initially is the mistress of his rival Frank Lucas. She represents the hollow excess of the 1980s, Miami underworld. She became a symbol of wealth and addiction. Elvira is known for her iconic style and cold demeanor. She is not starstruck by Tony and challenges him. She becomes bored and emotionally distant, using cocaine and quaaludes to cope with her life. Manny Rivera. Manny Rivera is the loyal best friend and partner in crime to Tony Montana, played by Stephen Bauer, helping him rise in the Miami's drug trade. Known as Manny Ray, he has charisma and is street smart. He often acts as foil and more level headed compared to Tony's intensity. Unfortunately, when Tony discovers Manny has married his sister Gina, in a fit of rage, Tony kills Manny. Yes, Scarface is by far my favorite gangster movie of all time. I love the soundtrack, the music, the actors, and the fact that it was in Miami because during the '80s, Miami was popping. You had Miami Vice, a TV show, and it just shows the beautiful weather and the bright colors that. Because if you look at that movie, like everybody, it would look like it was just summer all the time down there. I mean, granted, it is Miami, but like I said, the women was beautiful. Like I said, the men looked nice in those suits and all that. Like I said, I love the style that Scarface showed. And of course, Tony Montana, he was an immigrant and he did build an empire, but it was the wrong way, like they say, on the bad end of the American dream. But yeah, Scarface is my movie. That's one of those movies that, like I said, I quote, I watch all the time. And once again, Tony Montana was just like Henry Hill. Once he started taking his own product is how his downfall happened. He was smart. He didn't trust a lot of people, but once he started doing the cocaine, he got distracted. And that's what, like I said, I don't understand when you are in that business, that illegal business, and you decide to take your own product. Like, I don't understand how that works. Like, that do not make sense. Like I said, you're trying to sell the stuff, but you're taking it and you're getting off your horse, off your rocker because you can't focus. But yes, those was my top 5 gangster movies. Like I said, 5, Once Upon a Time in America. 4, The Godfather. 3, Goodfellas. 2, American Gangster, and number 1, Scarface. So, and I'm also real quick talk about, most of these mafia movies, past and present, most of them, they all take place in New York because that's, when immigrants was coming over, the first thing you seen was Statue of Liberty. So, when you had Italians coming over, Irish, that was the first thing you seen was the Statue of Liberty. And it's just, like I said, in all of my top 5 movies, either they were set, they were filmed in New York, and most of them was based in New York, but they all just got a New York connection. So, many iconic gangster movies has been set in New York. It evolved from the 1930s gangsters archetypes of these films, which chronicled the rise, violent power struggles, and shows the themes of loyalty, betrayal, and the Italian-American experience in New York City. So, Scarface. The assassination plot scene, a high-tension scene where Sosa sends Tony, Alberto, and the crew to New York City to assassinate a Bolivian journalist who will be exposing their drug operations. So that's the only time in Scarface where he was in New York. Like I said, when him and the crew was sent up there to assassinate a journalist. American Gangster. The primary setting for Frank Lucas's drug empire includes West 116th Street and 8th Avenue in Harlem, New York. Goodfellas. It's set largely in the Brooklyn, Queens area, but it captures various New York and New Jersey mob scenes. Of course, The Godfather is set in Staten Island, Little Italy, and the Bronx. These locations show the exterior of the Corleone mansion. Scenes from Little Italy shows where Don Corleone was shot. And then, Once Upon a Time in America is set in the Lower East Side of New York. Scenes include Dumbo, Brooklyn, and the Manhattan Bridge view. So yeah, like I was saying, most mob movies and activities were in the state of New York. Granted, of course the mob is everywhere. I mean, if Vegas and all that, but most operations do take place in New York, and that's just so ironic that I happen to have on this New York shirt today, which is a nice Air Apostle shirt. But yeah, like I said, most all these mob movies take place in New York. So now we get to America's most notorious gangster. Of course, Al Capone, nicknamed Scarface, is considered America's most famous gangster, dominating the Chicago underworld as the boss of the Chicago outfit during the Prohibition era. Capone was born in Brooklyn, but moved to Chicago to work for Johnny T. He eventually took over the criminal empire, which evolved in bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution. Capone was behind the notorious violence like the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre. He was eventually sentenced to 11 years in federal prison for tax evasion. Al Capone died on January 25th, 1947, at the age of 48, following a stroke and pneumonia due to a heart attack. Al Capone's impact on pop culture. Al Capone has had a profound, lasting impression on pop culture. He transformed the public perception of gangsters into celebrity figures, influencing countless films, literature, and TV shows. Hollywood began focusing on Capone with movies like Little Caesar in 1931 and Scarface in 1932. The remake in 1983 was inspired by his life. So yeah, that's kind of crazy. Like, all the activities that Al Capone was involved in, and he dies from pneumonia and heart attack in jail. That's just crazy. You would expect, oh yeah, he's a mob man. Of course he's gonna get shot up. Nah, he died of basically just natural causes, because that's what a lot of elderly and sick people just die. I mean, he basically passed away due to natural causes. So, that's America's most notorious. I said, of course, we have, Lucky Luciano, Bumpy Johnson, Gotti. Like, I mean, we do got notorious crime bosses. But, of course, Al Capone is probably America's most notorious and famous gangster of all time. Now I will be talking about the GOAT in Hollywood, the GOAT actor when it comes to playing in these mob movies. Of course, it's the one and only Robert De Niro. De Niro is considered the greatest actor in gangster and mob movies due to his high volume, acclaim, and dramatic roles. He is known for his roles in The Godfather 2, Once Upon a Time in America, Goodfellas, Casino, and The Irishman. Even though this may be debatable, De Niro is arguably the best actor who has done the best and worked the most within that genre when it comes to mafia and gangster. I was kind of torn because I was just like, well, you could put, to me, it's only three guys in Hollywood that, of course, now that they're older, but 30, 40 years ago, you had to put these three guys in a gangster movie. Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Joe Pesci. That's why I was kind of torn between Robert De Niro and Al Pacino, because Al Pacino, I mean, this dude played Michael Corleone and Tony Montana, like two of the biggest, ruthless gangsters in movie history. So that's why, and like I said, Joe Pesci, he just plays the short, hot-tempered, killing people. I mean, that's all Joe Pesci doing all these mob movies. I mean, granted, like I said, he is definitely an all-star when it comes, because I mean, like I said, Goodfellas, Casino, and like I said, he does that craft well. But like I said, don't nothing compared to Robert De Niro and like I said Al Pacino. But like I said, I'm still say Robert De Niro is still the GOAT when it comes to mob movies. I mean, like I said, you can't think of a gangster or mafia movie without the great Robert De Niro. You talking to me? Like I said, the different roles he done played in like the decades, like in the 70s with The Godfather, the 80s was Once Upon a Time in America, and then the 90s, of course, with Casino, Goodfellas, and I think The Irishman was that 2000s. That might have been in another decade. But still, like, the fact that he spanned like 40, 50 years in one genre. And that's why I say, to my opinion, like I say, he is the GOAT when it comes to playing in gangster movies. So yes, guys. So that was definitely my like I said, that was my take on, like I said, my top 5 gangster movies. Like I said, I've seen them all a bunch of times, and they never get old. They never get old. Like I said, I can watch them all every day, all day. So I hope you guys like today's episode. Like I said, of course, I would like your feedback. Like I said, if you got a favorite gangster movie, or if you got a favorite actor or anything like that, that you guys like in these movies, like I said, definitely let me know. Like I said, comment, like, subscribe, of course, all that good stuff. And yeah, like I said, if you guys got any more ideas, if you guys have any topics that you want me to just hit on, like I said, of course, like I said, I would love for you guys to just let me know. Like I said, I don't mind talking about anything and whatever. Yeah, guys. I mean, like I said, I hope you guys like today's episode. I wish I could do 10, but like I said, since I'm pressed for time, everything I do is on to be 5. So like I said, whenever I do a movie, it's on to be 5. If I do songs, it's on to be 5. If I do ads, like I said, everything, because like I said, I'm pressed for time. And even though I can talk a lot, I'm still under, under a time limit, But like I said, if you guys have got top 5, let's say gangster movie or anything that you guys want to see, I said, come holler at your boy. Like I said, let me know, and or like I said, top 5 actors, anything. Like I said, anything you guys want to discuss. Just like I said, just hit me up. Before we end today's episode, I want you guys to have a safe and good Easter. Don't forget the meaning of Easter. I think people get caught up in Easter bunnies, the candy, the colors, outfits, the true meaning of Easter. You have to have it in your heart, and you have to know what it is. You have to show kids what the true meaning of Easter is, because, like I said, we get wrapped up in the activities, which it's fun. The Easter egg hunts and all that, candy and all that. But like I said, we can't lose fact of the real reason we celebrate Resurrection Sunday. So guys, once again, my name is Daniel, aka D Money. Until next time, be blessed. I'm out.